let's animate the realistic scene. And in my case here, it's sort of a static scene, so we're going to add some camera animation. And I want it to seem realistic, so I'm not going to have objects sort of animating on their own. You may have a couple objects in yours that it makes sense to do that, or if there's a car or something like that. But in this case, not. Let's go ahead and Control D again to get our project settings. Make sure we're 24. We'll say that this one's 5 seconds as well. And again, we want the camera moving at a consistent speed. So I'll make sure I set my interpolation for linear. That'll make it easier to accomplish that. I have a regular camera here. In this one, instead of zooming in or zooming out, although that may be more appropriate depending on how you set your scene up, I'm going to have a little bit of rotational motion. Let's go ahead and delete the existing camera. And I'll come over to cameras and grab a target camera. Target camera makes two things, the camera and the target. Let's look through the camera. There it is. And you can see that we're kind of off axis now. Part of the reason we're off axis is because the target camera always looks at the target. And so we need to put our target somewhere that makes sense. So I'm going to move it up, maybe right about here. That works. And then I'll take the camera and let's move this up a little bit so we're kind of looking down on this. There we go. I like that. And now if I move the camera, I can just set positional keyframes and I'll get rotation for free because it always looks at the target because of the target tag. And so let's use the same rules as the surreal scene. Only two camera keyframes, one at the beginning, one at the end. Don't have the camera move around things or move in and move out. We're only doing one shot here. So the camera is just moving in one direction over the course of the shot. Let's move it slightly. There we go. A lot of times I like to do this from the top view. Makes it a little bit easier to see. And I'll make sure that I'm in not object space, but world space. Makes it a little easier to move the camera. And I'll set some position keyframes. Fast forward to the end. And again, move just slightly. Keyframe again. And let's come back to all four views and see how that looks. That works for now. Great. The other thing I wanted to do in this scene is that it's against the studio backdrop, which is fine. But this is clearly like an office setup, so what if we try to make it look a little bit more like an office? This bowl is also getting hidden. Let's move this to maybe a more prominent location. Right about there. There we go. That gives us a little bit more visual interest, I think. I like that. We see we're reflecting the outside. If we go to Shift V, our settings that we talked about, and our reflections, I'm going to turn on screen space reflections and turn up the distance here to see if that adjusts any of these. There we go. That took a second to sort of click in. You see when I do this now, I get some reflecting of what's going on in the actual scene. Again, these aren't true ray trace reflections, but they're just, this helps quite a bit to make it look more like it's in the scene. And let's also add more of like a studio, or no, I might want to make it a room. So actually, let's hold off on that. That looks better. I'm going to make sure that I update it over here in my viewport settings. Let me sort of say geometry only, and over here, make sure I get all my effects from over there so that my render looks exactly the same. I'll make it a little bit smoother. That's better. Okay, so now what if I wanted to make it look more like a room? I'm going to turn off the backdrop, not delete it, and I'm going to make a cube as the start of my room. There we go. And I'll go into the orthographic views to sort of size this room. Something like this. And I'll hit E, move it so the corners maybe over there. And then let's move this room up so the bottom of the cube is kind of where the floor should be. You can see that's looking better over there. Let's make this a bit taller. And yeah, that's not bad. Good. Now, let's zoom in a little bit here on this cube. I want things to look like they're floating. That's a bit better. Great. That's better. The lighting now looks a little strange. So let's address that. There's two lights in my scene. I have a light that I made, which is a target light. The first thing I'm going to do is go over to the shadows and turn those down. Let's say 50. That's better. And then the other light is part of the object from the asset browser. So I'm going to go over to my camera. I actually want a little bit wider field of view here. I'm going to say 50, or sorry, 30. That's better. And if you brought in a lamp or something from the asset browser, not only does it have the geometry for the lamp, it also has, if you dial down, maybe a light. And so you just need to sort of drill down into the object. Each object has its own hierarchy. Some of them may be more complicated than others, but as I drill down, there's a light icon labeled bulb, and you see that this is not a piece of geometry, it's an actual light. And I'm going to expand that. I'm going to turn it down, the intensity of the light. And I'm also going to come over to the shadows and turn those down as well. Let's say 20. There we go. That's a better look, and it also is very tinted. I'm going to not give that quite as much of an indoor look. That's better. Now if we wanted this to have some more texture to it, I want to move actually the room itself. So let's come over here and call this room now. And the other thing I'm going to make sure is if I look over here, I'm going to click on the light I made. And yeah, see, this is a bit problematic. It's outside the room. And so I'm going to make sure that it does stay inside the room. So let's move it over here. Kind of like this. You see that it immediately changes shadowing quite a bit. That's better. Maybe expand this. A weird shadowing with this. I don't know if that's because this is intersecting or not. This is one of those limitations with the viewport renderer, and so it's not going to do anything different there. Let's see if we can just minimize it, the scale of this object a little bit. There we go. Okay, so if we wanted to add some floor and wall texture, let's make this one larger. Let's save incremental. And in order to do that, we're going to need to select the cube that we made for the room and hit C, so that now it's accessible as individual pieces of geometry. I'm going to come over to my asset browser into materials, and let's look for tile and find something pretty minimal, maybe these wall tiles. Now we want to put it on just the wall, not the floor, and so I need to switch to polygon mode, and now I can select, by holding down shift, both of these walls, and if I drag it onto the cube, which is now our room, it'll apply only to the polygons I have selected. This will only work if you selected the cube and pressed C, then switched to polygon mode. Now we can drag that over to the wall. That's good. The tiles are way too big, and so let's select the tag and come down to tiles, and maybe 16 and 14. There we go, that looks more appropriate. It will look a little purple because it's currently selected. If I select the bottom there we go, that looks correct. And let me find a parquet floor. That looks good. I'll selected the floor, bottom polygon, and I'll drag this one on there. Great. And again, we select that one, maybe 5, 5. That looks pretty good. And let's deselect. Nice. So now that's better. I'd like the shadows to speak a little bit more. So let's come over here to the light I have above everything and see what it looks like if we dial these shadows up. You see we're getting some shadowing on the wall there, but the shadows don't seem to be working very well with this texture. Let's try a different one. Room, polygon mode. Let's try this floor. And that went to the wrong one. I gotta select the bottom floor polygon. Put this one on there. And again, maybe 6, 6. That's a little too much. 4, 4. And I'm going to this light. And let's check out our shadows. Maybe in our floor lamp. That's washing out some of the shadows. Let's check our light, make sure it's actually in the room. It does look like it's in the room. Let's come over here and look at this. That's better. And let's see if we can find a more neutral floor. I'm going to delete both of those floors. You can see the shadowing shows up well there, just not on those highly reflective ones. So maybe I just pick something different. We want to keep the visual interest with the subjects, so we don't want something too busy for the floor. Let's see if, again, select the room, select the polygon, there we go. There we go. And so more of a carpet. And now that allows me to come back to that light and decrease the intensity of those shadows. Let's go down to 30. Great. And that gives us a little better sense of space, I think. Great. So again, the only thing animating here is the camera view. I would experiment more with the animation in the surreal scene, not the realistic scene. Great. This one's ready to go to the renderer. Again, making sure that I say copy all the effects from the viewport, and making sure that I have geometry only checked, and all the other settings that we talked about in the other one. Great, and so that'll give you your 2 animated scenes.